James Cagney's hidden life, a queer love buried in silence. He was Hollywood's original tough guy, fists flying, eyes blazing, voice like a machine gun. But off-screen, James Cagney lived a life so private, so carefully guarded, that even decades later, we're still asking, was the real story buried behind the silence? A secret friendship with Humphrey Bogart, late-night getaways, glances that said more than words ever could. In a time when being queer could end a career, did James Cagney love in the shadows to protect his truth? Let's peel back the mask and step into the silence he left behind. James Francis Cagney was born on July 17, 1899, right in the heart of New York City. Not the glamorous, shining city you see in postcards, but the rough-edged, unforgiving sprawl of Manhattan's Lower East Side. A place that chewed up the weak and taught the rest how to survive. His family was Irish-American, poor and proud. Life wasn't gentle. It was loud, crowded, and hungry. He grew up dodging fists and finding ways to stretch a single coin across a full day. There were no safety nets, only instincts. That world didn't just raise him, it carved him from stone. It gave him a streetwise confidence, a lightning-fast mouth, a fighter's resilience, both physical and emotional. These weren't just traits, they were survival tools. And later, they would become the soul of the characters he brought to life. The gangsters, the rebels, the wounded men who never showed weakness unless no one was looking. But back then, he wasn't chasing spotlights. He was chasing work. Cagney floated between odd jobs, office boy, boxer, scenery painter. He was scraping by, not standing out. And then, as if destiny threw him a line, he stumbled into vaudeville. At first, it was just a gig, but when he got on that stage and started to dance, something inside him caught fire. He wasn't just good, he was electric. He could move like no one else, sharp, precise, yet wild with energy. Tap dancing became his heartbeat, his rebellion, his calling. And the audience? They couldn't take their eyes off him. That stage became his training ground. Vaudeville taught him rhythm, timing, control, not just with his feet but with his entire body. And more importantly, it taught him how to connect, to hold a crowd, to own the moment. He didn't know it yet, but that raw presence would carry him all the way to Hollywood and into legend. Because James Cagney didn't just act, he erupted onto the screen. Cagney's official film debut came in 1930 in a modest picture called Sinner's Holiday. He wasn't the headliner, not yet. But just beneath the surface, something dangerous and electric was waiting to break loose. It didn't take long. The very next year, in 1931, he exploded into stardom with The Public Enemy, and Hollywood would never be the same. Cagney wasn't playing Tom Powers, he became him. Cold, charismatic, brutally real, the kind of gangster who could smile while pulling a trigger. A man born not in fiction, but from the gutters and back alleys he knew all too well. Audiences didn't just watch the film, they felt it. His performance crackled with a danger that was new, raw, unpredictable, and terrifyingly human. Then came the grapefruit. In a scene now etched in cinema history, Cagney, without warning, slammed half a grapefruit into the face of his co-star. It was shocking, unscripted, intimate in its violence. It wasn't just an act of cruelty, it was a challenge to the audience. Look at who this man really is. And yet somehow, you couldn't look away. That single moment redefined what a leading man could be. Gone were the polished heroes. Cagney introduced something more complex, a man who could terrify you, fascinate you, and maybe even make you care. Throughout the 1930s and 40s, he became a box office titan. But he never let himself be boxed in. From Each Dawn I Die to the Roaring Twenties to White Heat, he built a filmography that was as fierce as it was fearless. In Angels with Dirty Faces, 1938, he played Rocky Sullivan, a gangster on the brink of redemption. The performance was devastating. That final walk to the electric chair, some say it was acting. Others say it was Cagney's soul bleeding through the screen. He earned an Oscar nomination and left audiences in tears. Then came White Heat, 1949. And with it, the line that would outlive him. Made it, ma, top of the world. It wasn't just a shout. It was a scream from the edge. Manic, triumphant, doomed. and it became legend. But even as he burned through the screen with grit and danger, Cagney wasn't defined by violence. He was too big for any one box. And in 1942, he proved it with Yankee Doodle Dandy. Gone were the gangsters. In their place, George M. Cohan, a tap-dancing, flag-waving showman. Cagney didn't just perform. He lit up the screen, singing, tapping, spinning across the stage with joy that felt like it came from somewhere deep and honest. He won the Academy Award for Best Actor, and more than that, he won over every last skeptic. Critics who thought they had him figured out suddenly saw something else, the heart behind the fury, the artist beneath the fighter. Because James Cagney didn't just play tough. He was tough, but he was also tender and theatrical, and totally unafraid to show both sides. He wasn't just building a career, he was creating a new kind of man on screen. Off-screen, James Cagney was every bit as bold as the characters he played. He didn't fear authority, he challenged it. And when the Hollywood studio system tried to tighten its grip, Cagney didn't bow. He pushed back. Hard. At a time when actors were expected to be obedient, grateful, and silent, Cagney broke the mold. He wasn't just an employee, he was an artist, and he believed in the right to protect that art. When Warner Brothers, the very studio that had made him a star, tried to dictate the terms of his career, he took them to court. And he won. It was one of the earliest, boldest battles for creative freedom in Hollywood history. He demanded fair compensation. He demanded respect. And in doing so, he helped spark something much bigger, the fight for actors' rights. Cagney played a pivotal role in founding the Screen Actors Guild, not for ego, but for justice. He wasn't just standing up for himself. He was standing up for every performer who came after. And the industry never forgot it. But while his battles in the boardroom were public, his personal life was something he guarded fiercely. In the early 1920s, during an audition for a Broadway play, he met Frances Willard Vernon, a young woman with charm, grit, and a quiet wisdom that matched his own. They married soon after. And in a town known for scandal and short-lived romances, they defied every stereotype. Their marriage lasted over 60 years. Together, they adopted 2 children, James Jr. and Kathleen, and raised them far from the flashbulbs and headlines. No red carpets, no interviews, just family, privacy, and a quiet kind of love. To the outside world, the Cagneys were the perfect American story. The movie star with the loyal wife, the children growing up away from the madness of Hollywood. But those who knew the industry well whispered something else. Because for all the roles he played, for all the defiance he showed the studios, there was one part of Cagney's story that remained carefully locked away. Something that didn't make it into the magazines. A chapter never written, a name never spoken in interviews. But one that followed him, quietly, persistently, through every stage of his life. A relationship that lived in silence, but never truly faded. In the polished machine of 1930s and 1940s Hollywood, everything about a star was a performance, even off camera. Studios controlled not just the scripts, but the lives. They dictated where you went, who you dined with, how you smiled, how you dressed, and most of all, who you were allowed to love. Any deviation from the fantasy they sold to America was a threat. And for 2 of the biggest stars of the era, James Cagney and Humphrey Bogart, that threat was dangerously real. Both men were Hollywood's embodiment of masculinity. Tough, sharp, charismatic. On screen, they were rebels and gangsters, kings of cool, brimming with testosterone and defiance. They smoked, they drank, they shot from the hip, and audiences worshipped them for it. But behind closed doors, something softer, something more forbidden, was unfolding. Cagney and Bogart weren't just co-stars, they were inseparable. They shared late-night dinners in private clubs, took long drives along the winding roads of Mulholland Drive, and most telling of all, escaped together for quiet weekends in remote beach houses along the California coast. It was during one of those film shoots that a young Warner Bros. Production assistant, speaking years later in a posthumous interview, claimed to have witnessed a moment that still haunted him. I walked in and froze. Jimmy wasn't saying a word, but the way he looked at Bogey, like nothing else in the room mattered. It wasn't lust, it wasn't show, it was intimacy, quiet and deep. Both men, of course, were married. Cagney remained with Frances Vernon until the end. Bogart famously found his final chapter with Lauren Bacall. But some Hollywood historians have long believed those marriages served dual purposes. Love? Yes, but also protection. A shield, a way to preserve careers in an industry that would have destroyed them had the truth come out. William J. Mann, one of the most respected queer historians in Hollywood scholarship, has written that Cagney and Bogart's relationship followed a familiar but unspoken pattern. Private companionship, public distance, emotional codependence hidden behind cigar smoke and staged photo ops. No tabloids dared print it, not in those days, but the insiders whispered. In the private cocktail lounges of Los Angeles, they called them the Boys Club. And in one confidential 1943 letter, now buried in the archives of the Margaret Herrick Library, an MGM executive wrote chillingly, "Cagney and Bogart, the Boys Club has its secrets. Just don't let Luella catch wind." And she didn't. Because James Cagney, for all his fire and fury on screen, was a man of immovable control off of it. When asked late in life why he never wrote a memoir, he smiled and simply said, "A gentleman doesn't tell." To some, it was a clever deflection. To others, a quiet confession. Not of shame, but of love. A kind of love that couldn't exist in public. A kind of love that had to be buried beneath tuxedos and headlines and decades of silence. He wasn't hiding from fear. One biographer wrote, he was protecting something sacred, he was protecting Bogart. And maybe that's what makes their story linger, because behind the fame, the marriages, the studio contracts, there was something real. A bond deep enough to survive rumors, strong enough to outlast time, and private enough to remain unsolved. Was it love? Was it friendship? Or was it both? Something complicated, unspoken, and ahead of its time? Whatever it was, they took it to their graves. And in doing so, they left behind not just a mystery, but a reminder of how many stories Hollywood buried to protect an illusion, and how much truth was sacrificed in the name of stardom. By the mid-1950s, James Cagney had had enough. Enough of the studio politics, enough of the endless expectations, enough of pretending. After 2 decades of living under the microscope, of being everyone's idea of a man, a star, a myth, he longed for something real. Not applause, not cameras, just quiet. So he did what few legends have the courage to do. He walked away. Cagney bought a 120-acre patch of land in Stanfordville, a sleepy little hamlet tucked inside Dutchess County, New York. He called it Very Farm, a name born from Vernon, his wife Frances's maiden name, and Cagney, a merging of love and legacy, of the public figure and the private man. What started as a weekend retreat quickly became a full-time refuge. Over the years, he expanded it acre by acre until the land stretched over 750 acres, a vast expanse of green pastures, rolling hills, and forest trails. But for Cagney, it wasn't about size, it was about peace. Unlike other stars who bought country estates for image, Cagney actually lived the life. He wasn't dressing for the part. He was the part. He repaired stone walls with his own hands, rebuilt weathered barns board by board, and most of all, he raised Morgan horses, a breed known not just for strength, but for grace. He loved them fiercely. They weren't just animals to him, they were kindred spirits, quiet, strong, beautiful in a way the world didn't always understand. He'd rise at dawn to ride them, wander the fields in long, contemplative silence, sketch their outlines in a leather-bound journal he never showed anyone. To Cagney, they were a reflection of his truest self, disciplined, dignified, and far from the noise. But Very Farm was more than just a sanctuary. It was his armor. It gave him space from a world that once tried to own every piece of him. And here, with Frances by his side, he built a different kind of life. One rooted in privacy, purpose, and deep, deliberate distance. Few visitors were allowed, only the closest. Neighbors remembered him as generous but guarded, a man who smiled with warmth but kept his world tightly sealed. He never spoke of Hollywood, and especially not of the men whose names lingered in whispers, names like Bogart. But even in exile, the past found him. In the 1970s, a journalist digging into the queer histories of old Hollywood reached out to Cagney for comment, specifically about the rumors that had followed him and Bogart for decades. Cagney didn't respond with outrage. He didn't deny. Instead, through his lawyer, he sent back a single poetic line. "Some truths are deeper than memory. Let the pictures speak for themselves." That was it. No elaboration, no confession. Just mystery and silence preserved. Even as his health declined, first from glaucoma, then from complications tied to diabetes, Cagney remained fiercely independent. He suffered a minor stroke in 1977, but he kept moving. Cane in hand, he walked the same stone paths he'd once laid. He read poetry, sat by the pond, watched the sun fall behind the hills from his favorite stone bench. And though his hands eventually trembled, he painted, determined, defiant, unbowed. Very Farm wasn't where James Cagney went to fade. It was where he went to be whole. Not a star, not a legend, not a tough guy, just a man. Complex, gentle, watchful, and still holding on to a truth the world had never been brave enough to hear. James Cagney passed away on March 30th, 1986. He was 86. The cause was a heart attack. But what truly ended that day wasn't just a life. It was a legacy of silence. Carefully guarded, fiercely protected, and perhaps deeply painful. His funeral was small, respectful, held at St. Francis de Sales Church in Manhattan. No Hollywood circus, no grand speeches, just the quiet farewell of a man who had lived much of his truth in the shadows. Ronald Reagan, his former co-star, now the President of the United States, gave a televised eulogy and called him a great man. And he was. But what Reagan and the world didn't say is what you and I are now brave enough to ask. What if one of the greatest Hollywood icons of all time lived his greatest love behind closed doors? James Cagney was laid to rest at Gate of Heaven Cemetery. His grave is modest, no towering monument, no sculpted tribute. Just a name, just silence. And yet, for those of us watching closely, listening carefully, that silence roars. Because James Cagney's story isn't just about a man who changed the face of American cinema. It's about someone who may have carried a secret, not out of shame, but out of necessity. A man who may have loved deeply and fully in a world that would have destroyed him for it. In every scene he played, every punch thrown, every line barked with that signature rhythm, there may have been a part of him speaking through the character, a part the audience could never name, but always feel. And for decades, Hollywood made sure we never asked, never wondered, never saw. But we see it now. We see the quiet weekends with Bogart, the glances that said too much, the marriages that looked perfect on paper, the studio-controlled headlines, the public silence, and we see what that silence cost. Not just to Cagney and Bogart, but to every queer person in that era who had to choose between love and survival. So what do we do with that silence today? We don't break it to shame him. We don't expose it for scandal. We break it to honor him. Because if James Cagney did carry a secret love for another man, and carried it all his life, then that love deserves to be seen. It deserves to be remembered. It deserves to be part of the legacy. Because queer stories have always been here, even if history tried to erase them. And that is the value this video brings. This isn't just about old Hollywood. It's about now. It's about how far we've come and how much further we still have to go. It's about recognizing the coded truths in our past so we can live more freely in our present. It's about giving voice to those who never got to speak, and reminding every viewer who's ever felt like they had to hide. You are not a rumor. You are not a footnote. You are not a whisper in the background of someone else's story. You are the main character, and your truth matters. So when we talk about James Cagney, let's talk about all of him. Not just the awards, or the famous lines, or the gangster persona. Let's talk about the man behind the myth. The man who may have loved in silence. The man who fought for his freedom on screen and carried his heart quietly behind it. Because real courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it hides in plain sight. And sometimes it dies with the hope that one day, someone would understand. That someone is you. James Cagney was a legend, not just because of what he gave the world, but because of what he may have chosen to protect. In an era where silence was survival, Cagney's quiet may have spoken louder than words. And if his deepest truth was buried, it was buried with care, with dignity, and perhaps with love. For queer people today, stories like his remind us how far we've come and how much still remains hidden in the shadows of history. If this story moved you, if you believe in honoring every kind of love and lifting the voices history tried to silence, then help us keep telling these stories. Subscribe, leave a comment, and share this video. Your voice helps bring the hidden to light.